Well, it's match week 4 in a championship season and things just keep getting more unpredictable. After another weekend loaded with away victories, are we going to see a change and a resume of the norm this weekend in match week 4? As always, we're going to preview and predict all 12 matches, and I'll encourage you to do exactly the same in the comments below. If you beat or match my overall score, you will get a shout out in the next recap after the international break. But between now and then, it's going to be a very difficult weekend to call. Let's go back to another one that was match week 3 last weekend. And remarkably, only 3 people got more than 6 points. Nobody got more than 10. And while I was disappointed initially with my total of 6, it's actually turned out to be pretty decent. In the sea of away wins, I only predicted one of them. I got a point for Blackburn's win at Hull, in addition to Birmingham and Coventry's home wins, albeit none of us called the 7-1 that Coventry won by. And I also got my perfect score when it started so well back on Friday night for the Championship's favourite scoreline between Derby County and Bristol City. So 6 points for me as a result of all of that, and I was joined in joint 4th place by a huge number of you who managed to get 6 as well. One perfect score for most of you, which able to get you near the total. Nobody got more than half of the outcomes right. So level with me on 6 are Mello, Gordon, Macca, Marco, Ben, Keno and Nigel. And then in 3rd place on 7 is Teo. In 2nd place on 9 is Isaac. Return to form for you this week. And top of the tree, the only person in double figures. Let's all salute Adam, who got 2 perfect scores and 6 correct outcomes in total. A brilliant effort for you. Half of the match week you called correctly. Now, can you do the same in match week 4? And are we going to learn and finally go for lots of away wins? No is the answer, I'm telling you now. Let's go and move on to the Friday night football. Sides that were 2 divisions apart this time last year. It is Leicester City versus Birmingham City. And both of these have had pretty interesting starts to the season. Leicester have managed 2 wins from 3 despite not being at their fluent best and despite missing hatfuls of chances in most games. But actually the Charlton one last weekend was maybe a little bit different because yes, they got a 1-0 win on the road, but if anything, Charlton deserved to win that game. Some of the saves the goalkeeper made were sensational. Had a couple of very hairy moments defensively. Charlton had all the best chances, had almost all of the running in the match. And despite having a bit more of the possession, Leicester didn't really do a huge amount with it. So, a little bit of a worrying performance, but actually ended up getting them 3 points, which is the most important thing at this stage of the season. Still not convinced, though, in its Leicester team that they're going to be scoring plenty of goals the way they're going at the moment. So, still definitely an area for improvement. On the flip side of things, if we go and have a look at Birmingham City, a frustrating day almost against Oxford. Yes, they got that first half goal, but in the end, weren't able to add to it, weren't able to add another shot on target despite some brilliant chances. Dominated the ball, did dominate the game generally, but not showing that ruthless edge in front of goal yet. If it clicks, then Birmingham are going to be frightening because they are creating bundles of opportunities, but they're just not taking them at the moment. They did lose their first game of the season at home to Port Vale, surprisingly, in the Cup in midweek. Yes, a rotated team. You wouldn't expect it to affect league form too much, but definitely cause for concern regardless. A first home defeat in a long time. For this game, again, it's about who takes their chances. I expect Birmingham to be a threat on the break. I expect Leicester to be decent at home as they were against Sheffield Wednesday. So I'm going to sit on the fence as I did the previous Friday night and hope the Championship's favourite scoreline delivers again. 1-1. I should give a quick apology and service announcement at this point to say we are mid-house renovation and there is currently no window in my office, so you can hear a bit more background noise. That is the reason why. As we move on to the first of 3 early kickoffs and a dedicated TV game on Saturday lunchtime. It is Middlesbrough versus Sheff United. Borough, perfect start in the league after all the derision for that 4-0 cup defeat, turned up with a 3rd win in 3 away at Norwich. Yes, aided by a red card and still almost found a way to make it a grandstand finish. But 2 big goals late in the first half, a pretty decent away performance. Yes, both sides looked a bit ropey at the back in this game, but Rob Edwards' side did the job, got key players scoring, and in Finn Azaz and Tommy Conway, they've got 2 very good Championship players. But again, still signs of concern at the back, and that maybe for Borough is what we're going to be looking at in the next few weeks. However, a team with more concerns at the back, the front and pretty much everywhere else is Sheffield United. Another defeat, this time 1-0 at home to Millwall, where if we're being completely honest, Millwall were the better side, and yes, Sheffield United had possession, but with the greatest of respect, I'm a big fan of Alex Neil, and I think Millwall are doing brilliantly. I tipped them to be 6th this year. They don't often go on the road and have 17 shots and create that many big opportunities. And Sheffield United, as they were at home on the opening day, very open, very poor defensively. And see Ruben Sellers already taking a dig at the board about the spine of the team being sold and not replaced adequately. It doesn't look like that's going to be a marriage that ends well, does it? And maybe Chris Wilder had a point all along. So for this one, it's very hard to back against the Borough win. I don't fancy either defence to keep a clean sheet, despite Borough keeping 2 already. The Swansea game was really poor, and against Millwall, they did give up a lot of chances. So I'm going to go for the home win, but with both teams to score. And I'm going to go for Middlesbrough by 3-1, because I think United are so ropey at the back. The second early kickoff is a London derby and a game between two sides that have had a pretty tough week. QPR lost by 7-1 at Coventry. Yes, everything Coventry hit went in. Yes, on another day they wouldn't have conceded anywhere near that many, but they're still giving up chances. And I'm really surprised by this because I've watched Julian Stefan teams before and this has never happened. It's very strange to watch them so open, so vulnerable, not creating a lot, which, yes, the only bonus is that Richard Kone got his first goal for the club. But generally, Coventry dominated the game, had loads of chances, deserved to win very comfortably. And in the end, the scoreline is pretty harrowing. We saw some of the scenes with young players and fans at the end. It's not looking great, is it, at the moment? But home advantage in this one against a Charlton side that have also had a difficult week. Lost in midweek in the Cup to Cambridge. Had a bit of a strange performance there, albeit again with a side that had been rotated, and on another day it could have been an even scoreline. But one issue for Nathan Jones will be not taking chances. We mentioned against Leicester, huge positive that they're creating 20 chances against a side that have just come down. Had the best ones of the game. Leicester had some unbelievably fortuitous moments, made some great saves at the back as well. However, Charlton have got to start taking those because a lot of these games this season, we've seen it. They've not been able to produce goals. Just 1 in 3 games. That was late on against Watford. In another game, they should have scored more. So away from home, we've seen them normally take a very different approach. They've sat back. They've tried to hit on the break. And against a QPR side who are going to be fragile after that 7-1 defeat, I'm expecting a more defensive game from both. As a result, I was tempted to go for the 0-0, but I'm not going to trust the clean sheet. I'm going to go for the Championship's favourite scoreline of 1 goal apiece in this one. As we move on to the table toppers against another unbeaten side so far this year, it is Stoke City versus West Bromwich Albion. For Stoke, a very disappointing performance and result in midweek against Bradford in the Carabao Cup. Even with rotation, that's not the sort of outcome you want. However, it's been a very different story in the league where 3 wins out of 3, and after beating 2 of the relegation favourites, really stamped their authority with a 2-1 win despite having 10 men away at Southampton. Sorba Thomas, someone who we predicted to be one of the signings of the season this year, popped up with a brilliant individual goal from 10 men, which put them 2-0 up. And yes, it was a bit of a nervy finish towards the end. Yes, Southampton had some great chances. Even earlier in the game, the woodwork led a charmed life for the Stoke City goal. But they had a real threat on the road. They played in a different way and are starting to show a bit of an identity and are starting to look good on the counter. So I think it's really good signs from Mark Robins' side, but it's still early days and we've seen positive Stoke starts before. So let's not get too overexcited. For West Brom, they remain unbeaten, but slightly frustrated in a 1-1 draw at home to Pompey in a side where the visitors probably had the best chances of the game despite West Brom's general control of possession and attempts and territory. However, a great goal from Mikey Johnston kept the unbeaten start, and despite that being a little frustrating, despite some pretty interesting refereeing decisions, I think fairly unfortunate not to get a penalty, West Brom. It does mean that they stay unbeaten, they stay on 7 points. It's been an okay start for Ryan Mason. They've not looked brilliant, they've only scored 1 in each game. Going forward, maybe not had that ruthless edge, something we've said about West Brom a lot. But they've rediscovered their solidity, they've picked up 7 points, and they're going to be a good run this season if they can keep everyone fit. I do think on this occasion, Stoke might just edge the win. You've got to back them after winning 3-3. I'm going to go for another low-scoring game and 1-0 to Stoke City, but I would not be shocked if the Championship's favourite scoreline turns up there too. Let's move on to the 3pms beginning at Ewood Park and a team who played so well last weekend. It is Blackburn Rovers versus Norwich City. Blackburn with a 3-0 win away at Hull, even more emphatic than we predicted. We said they'd get off the mark, and boy did they. It wasn't just the result. Resounding performance, all of the best chances, could have had more, had a lot of the ball, were really aggressive, and a bit like we saw when he first came in, slow start for Ishmael, but there's talent there. And I wouldn't be against Blackburn having a decent season. Ahashi, we said, was going to be the star of that game. Cantwell had the opportunity to create, and they had pace in behind that whole defence. And Hedges and Ahashi took advantage. Brilliant stuff. Really good result and performance. On the flip side, Norwich City, disappointing week for them. Lost heavily in the Carabao Cup in midweek. Lost 2-1 at home to Middlesbrough. A game full of clear-cut chances for both. And while we've said Norwich are decent going forward, and as long as they've got Josh Sargent, they've got a chance, who, by the way, if he does go before deadline day, there is going to be a worry because he is the man who's putting the ball in the back of the net. But a red card, a little bit of ill discipline, and defensively they do look vulnerable this season. So gone is that imperious home form of Norwich, and now it's a little bit hit and miss. Not sure what to call in this one because Blackburn yet to produce a great display at home. Okay, their last game there was against Birmingham City. I think they might nick this one because Norwich have looked really poor at the back. They've conceded, in every game so far. Blackburn just kept the first clean sheet of the season. I don't think either will here, but I'll go for Blackburn Rovers by 2-1. As we move to Ashton Gate next for Bristol City versus Hull City. We just talked about the whole game against Blackburn. They were really abject, to be honest. They were completely outclassed, outplayed. Tactically, the manager was outthought in this match. And Blackburn Rovers did exactly what we predicted and were able to succeed easily with it. It was a really poor Hull home performance. And one thing we've seen this season already, with this game and the Oxford one last week, that albeit they managed to win, is that Hull are probably still going to have a pretty poor home record this year. Defensively, they've got to improve. They've let in 8 in their last 3 in all competitions. But the only thing that is making this harder for me is the opening day. They went to a side that were in the playoffs last year. They sat back, they were tactically astute, and they got a 0-0 draw and didn't really look under much threat. Will they do the same against Bristol City, following the blueprint of Charlton a couple of weeks ago, who went there and got a 0-0 draw, doing exactly what Hull did at Coventry? Bristol City were frustrated last week, and we talked about it for years, and it's the one thing that really sort of saw them into that playoff race last year, is they stopped conceding late goals. But it seems to be back this year. A 1-1 draw away at Derby, a decent result in the end, but a frustrating one because Derby created next to nothing. Bristol City weren't brilliant either. When you've got a 1-0 lead against a side that isn't offering much, to then concede a late goal is frustrating. The huge positive for Bristol City is that Scott Tyne is in form. They're getting him firing and he's looking great. But this, for me, has to be a low-scoring game. I think Hull will come to frustrate, as they did at Coventry. Bristol City will be looking for a way through. And then it's just whether we get a moment of magic. I'm going to go for there to be one, and I'm going to go for Bristol City by 1-0. As we move on to two sides that have had a winless and difficult start, and it is Ipswich Town versus Derby County. Derby out in the Carabao Cup in midweek after that late equaliser last weekend against Bristol City. Carlton Morris' start is a huge positive, but defensively, again, Derby giving up goals, that imperious home form from last year drying up. And to be honest, the other worry is that they're not creating much either. They didn't at times last year, but this isn't the usual John Eustace team we're seeing at home at the moment. There's a vulnerability about Derby that we haven't seen for a while. For Ipswich, on the other hand, a sea of 1-1 draws came to an end with a 1-0 defeat, surprisingly, away at Preston. Maybe doesn't tell the full story of the game. Preston scored with their only shot on target, one of only 2 shots on goal. Ipswich had created loads, but just not got that ruthless edge. And it's the one reason we predicted them to be up in that top 2 this year, is because we thought with the likes of Schmodix, with the likes of Philogene, Clark, who had had such good seasons in the Championship 2 years ago, we thought they were going to be able to take their opportunities, but it's a concern early on for Kieran McKenna. I expect them to click. They didn't all get regular game time throughout last year because of Liam Delap's form and Hutchinson being a regular. So I think maybe we'll see a different Ipswich in the next few weeks. Does make this game tough to call though. We know how Derby are going to try and set up. Whether they succeed or not, we don't know. But defensively, for the most part, they've been slightly more solid on the road than at home this year, albeit they've conceded goals galore in both. I'm going to go for Ipswich to win this game. I think they'll get their first one on the board. I'm going to go for it to be relatively tight and frustrating with a 2-1 win at Portman Road. Let's move on to another game that may well be classified as a home banker for a few. It is Millwall versus Wrexham. For Millwall, a really good win away at Sheffield United, then a good win in the Carabao Cup against Coventry where they progressed to the third round. It's been a decent start for them. They had that weird 3-0 game against Middlesbrough where they could have been ahead at half-time. It could have been a completely different game. Wasn't to be. And then they went and won 1-0 at Sheffield United, produced the Millwall special. Could have had a couple more on that day, but weren't that fluent and didn't take their chances. They did give up a fair few as well, but that seems to be the way Sheffield United are setting up this year. And for Millwall, it means that they've picked up 6 points. They're in a decent position. And with just a week of the window to go, they've still got some key players on their books. So looking okay for them at the moment. Not maybe so good for Wrexham, who, yes, on a lovely cup run after beating Preston in midweek in that. However, against Sheffield Wednesday, you could argue fairly fortunate. 2-0 up, then came the chaos. They conceded over 20 shots on their own goal. Sheffield Wednesday had the best chances of the game. And in the end, they should have won it right at the death. They had a brilliant opportunity that they didn't take advantage of. And against a side who are depleted and have lost so many key players in the situation they're in, it should have been game over. But we said it at the start of the season. People were criticising us for not putting Wrexham in the top 6. They are not good enough defensively. Yes, Callum Doyle will change that when he comes in, presumably from this week. But they need more in those fullback areas where they're so vulnerable. Otherwise, Wrexham are going to have a very difficult year. As it is, Millwall look by far the more solid of the two at the moment. I'd expect them to take advantage and be able to deal with the threat of Wrexham. They're primed to deal with a long ball up to Kiefer Moore, with the long throws, all of that. So I'm going to go for Millwall to win this one pretty comfortably by 2-0 at the Den. As we move on to one of the 2 remaining pointless sides this season against one that scored 7 last weekend. It is Oxford versus Coventry City. Oxford United worked hard to stay in the game against Birmingham last week, but in truth, didn't create much, didn't look like scoring on the road. And it has largely been a problem for Oxford since they came into the Championship away from home. They don't look like scoring goals. They're relying on the spectacular, they're relying on moments of magic, and they're relying on their defence being rock solid, which at the moment, I'm afraid it's not. On another day, Birmingham would have been more ruthless and had more, and as it is, it's another defeat for Oxford, who, having played Pompey and Hull, 2 of the teams that would expect it to be in and around them, they've lost both of those. They've then not gone and got anything at a top side either. The worrying start for Gary Rowett's men. As Coventry, well, if we take away the cup defeat in midweek against Millwall, it's been a brilliant start because 7 points, initial frustration against Hull City, that 0-0 draw, and then 12 goals in 2 games. Against QPR, everything they touched turned to gold. They were dominant, they created chances, they deserved to win comfortably. But 7 is one hell of a statement. It's a big win, it's a big result. They'd be very frustrated they didn't pick up that clean sheet at the end, letting in a 91st minute goal. Maybe a slight concern because they let in 3 at Derby, they've let in 2 at Millwall in the Cup. Maybe that's something to keep an eye on, particularly away from home. But in front of goal, they look great. Oxford, when they have a go, can create chances as well. We saw that at Hull City. I actually think this could be a really good game and a bit of a surprising one. And it's going to be my little hunch of the weekend. I'm going to go for Oxford to pick up their first point of the season because I don't think many will against Coventry. And I'm going to go for it to be the thriller of the weekend in the Championship with a 2-2 draw between Oxford and Coventry. 3 to go, and we move on to Portsmouth versus Preston North End. 2 sides that have had pretty decent starts in the circumstances. Portsmouth with a 1-1 draw against West Bromwich Albion away from home. A really good result in the end. Colby Bishop got the goal and they created some of the best chances of the match. As we mentioned a bit earlier on in the West Brom section, maybe a little bit fortunate with some of the refereeing decisions, but took advantage of them to get a point, and 4 out of 9 is not a terrible start at all. For Preston, on the other hand, out of the cup to Wrexham in midweek, but a very good start in the league. Wins at home to both Ipswich and Leicester. Very impressive against 2 of the relegated sides. And we did say it, Preston may have more success against the bigger teams this year, given the look and the style of their squad. Again, as Magic popping up with a penalty, he is such a threat. We talk a lot about his instincts off the pitch, which don't help him. But as a footballer, he's a very talented player. As it was, that penalty was Preston's only shot on target. Ipswich, if they'd been at their ruthless best, probably would have got something out of that game. But they didn't, and Preston won it, which is important at this stage of the season. Picking up points, a very good start. But on the road, they were uninspiring at QPR. Pompey are normally very good at home. And despite the fact that Pompey have had an indifferent start at home and maybe not looked as much of a threat in front of goal, I'm going to go for them to score 2 for the first time this season with a 2-1 win at home to Preston North End. The penultimate game sees us go to Hillsborough for Sheffield Wednesday versus Swansea. I would expect there to maybe be a few more than there was after the boycott against Leeds United in midweek. A really good effort to get through in the cup. You've got to give huge credit to Sheffield Wednesday. They're battling, they're giving everything, and they're picking up results where they can. They've gone on a run in the cup. They're into the third round. They should have won at Wrexham. We mentioned it a bit earlier on. To battle back from 2-0 down, I said in these games, Sheffield Wednesday will be fine when they're in a tight game, but when they go 1 or 2 down, that's the real test. And boy, did they stand up to it against Wrexham. Yes, a poor defensive effort from the home side, but created loads of chances, looked a real threat, should have won it in the end. Will be gutted that they didn't, but a fabulous effort to come back from 2 down. And in the end, probably should have been more, but really encouraging signs so far from Sheffield Wednesday. For Swansea, on the other hand, a relatively solid start. Another point on the board, through in the Carabao Cup to the third round on penalties. But look, they were undone by a moment of magic from Watford. They didn't give up that many chances in the game, but a brilliant free kick put them 1 down. But they fought back. They got that late equaliser. They showed the team spirit. What I would say from watching Swansea so far this season is maybe they're not the best team to watch as a neutral. It wasn't a good game against Borough on the opening day. That one fell into the same category. But Alan Sheehan is setting up a solid side and will then, like some of the coaches he's worked under before, including Nathan Jones, probably see that side progress and become a bit more expansive. As a result of all of that, it's probably hard to predict anything other than a 1-0 or a 1-1 based on Swansea's season so far. I know Sheffield Wednesday have created chances going forward, but I don't think they're going to be given as many by Swansea. We saw against Stoke, they weren't able to put one away. I think this is going to be a low-scoring one. Part of me wants to go for a 1-1 draw. I'm going to go for Swansea to nick it on the road by 1-0. But regardless, Sheffield Wednesday, a brilliant effort this week. And the final game is down at Vicarage Road, and it is Watford versus Southampton. Southampton bounced back to form with a 3-0 win at Norwich in a cup in midweek, but it was a really frustrating game against Stoke last weekend. Against 10 men at 1-0 down, you felt they could come back into the game. Instead, conceded a second to Sorba Thomas, and again, giving up big chances at the back. We saw it at home to Wrexham where they could have gone a second down if it wasn't for Bazunu. This time they did. They're giving up chances on the counter and they look vulnerable. Yes, they're adding players. Roerslev will come into the team defensively now too, but still a little bit worried. We know they've still got the firepower. They've got the opportunity going forwards, but where they've lost the likes of Walker-Peters, Bednarek, yes, weren't brilliant in the Premier League last year, but were solid at Championship level 2 years ago. But still creating chances, albeit not taking them going forward. They had a bit of misfortune with the woodwork, didn't they, last weekend? Robinson lighting to strike it a couple of times. However, they did manage to get a goal back and make it a grandstand finish. But you'd have to say it's a little bit of a frustrating day for Southampton. You can see the signs are there. They're going to be all right this year, but it's just going to take a little bit of time to gel, I think. I think one more signing maybe and then the window shutting might not be a bad thing for them. Now the Tyler Diblin saga's resolved, you'd imagine they'll be able to spend a little on deadline day. For Watford, a 1-1 draw at Swansea. Again, not the most inspiring performance overall, but created a couple of chances and scored a magical free kick. And we've said this about Watford. They have got some very talented players in that team. Again, though, they did concede a late goal. They do look a little bit vulnerable from set pieces at times. However, it's still a decent start for them in the middle of the road. And after that opening day, we were a little bit concerned about them. But they've managed to bounce back. They've done pretty well and picked up 4 points out of 6 in a 2 after. I don't really know how to go about this one because Watford are normally very good at home. Southampton actually look more of a threat on the road at the moment this season where teams are a little bit more open against them. And if Watford do that, it will open up space on the counter for some of those Saints attackers. And I do think they might take advantage. So against my better judgment and despite letting me down last week, I'm going to go for Southampton to hit a little bit of form with a 2-1 victory away at Watford. So with that out the way, let's have a quick recap of what we've gone for this weekend. Of course, 2 teams, Oxford and Bristol City. I couldn't factor in their Carabao Cup games as I'm recording this before their Wednesday fixtures. I did go for both to pick up points at home note. Bristol City a win and Oxford a draw. I've gone for Millwall to comfortably win 2-0 against Wrexham. Borough to heap the pressure on Ruben Sellers with a 3-1 win against Sheffield United. And I've gone for Ipswich Town to pick up their first win of the season against another side that hasn't got one yet in Derby County. But those are just my predictions for match week 4 of this championship season. What do you think? Do you agree or disagree? Let me know in the comment section down below and give us your predictions for this weekend's action. If you beat or match my overall score, you will get a shout out when we return after the international break to look ahead to match week 5. Between now and then, though, don't worry. Charlie and Craig will be back with their League One shorts predictions both this weekend and next, so you've got plenty to look forward to there. If you want to stay up to date with those and, of course, see us when we return, then please do subscribe and turn that notification bell on. But thank you very much for watching as always. Enjoy your weekend's action, and we'll see you back here after the international break to look ahead to match week 5.